Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. So today's episode's a little different than our normal episode. One of our listeners, previous guest, Reida, is my guest for today's episode, and we had this idea that we kind of go through our top 5 cigars and what we pair them with, and have a little story with each one. And we kind of just said, look, let's pick the criteria you want, pick 5, and let's just go. And it was interesting. We had different criteria. We really enjoy the same type of cigar. Our palates are the same. So we talk a little bit about very different cigars, why we like them. We talk a little bit about bourbon and some scotch. So if you're into cigars or learning a little bit and trying to understand a little bit more about them, this is a great episode for you. And if you're not into cigars, probably not a great episode. But I had fun, and that is the priority. So go grab a cigar, a cocktail, and strap in for another great episode of Sales and Cigars. So Russ, welcome to the program again. This is your second trip around, right?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
And you're an avid listener. I know you have a habit of kicking off the weekend for me with a photograph of what you're smoking on a Friday afternoon and what you're drinking on a Friday afternoon.
Yes, sir.
That's right. You're very consistent to be kicking off that around 3-4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. So
yeah, we earned that privilege after all these years, right? A little early start to happy hour on a Friday.
Absolutely. I have the privilege of being able to smoke a cigar during the day when I'm technically working, because my boss doesn't care.
Right.
So what we're gonna go through here is some of our favorite cigars. We'll talk a little bit about why. We'll talk a little bit about what we like to drink with them, what we like to pair up with them, and I just kind of like to keep it loose and just have a conversation. And we were talking before we started, but you had a great idea for a way to kick this off. And I think it's a great way to kick the segment off. So why don't you ask me the question again, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. My curiosity was with, fellow cigar smokers. How did you get involved? How did you get started smoking cigars in the first place?
So I remember the very first time I had a cigar was in the late 90s, and I was sitting in a Traverse City hotel bar when you could they had a humidor behind the bar, and you could smoke a cigar in the bar.
Nice.
And it was probably the worst experience a guy could have with a cigar, because I was probably 5 cocktails in, and I was just slobbering up the cigar. It was my first time. I had no idea what I was doing, and I got desperately sick. So that's technically the first time. But then I was playing golf. I took up golf, and I started playing with a gentleman who was about a 4 handicap. And he was giving me 20 to 25 strokes a side. just to give you an idea of what the delta was on our game.
Right. It's where I am now.
So he brought cigars the second time we played, because he figured he needed something to do when I was, hacking away. So I started smoking cigars, and my wife will tell the story. I've developed 2 bad habits that summer: golf and cigars.
Right.
And so I was smoking. The very first cigar that I had with him was a Rocky Patel 1992.
Very good. Yep.
And to this day, like whenever I have one of those, I think of him.
Sure.
Every once in a while, I'll send him a couple of them. But it was just on the golf course, and to me, it's something that kind of all goes together: golf, cocktails, and friends, and a cigar.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
That's great. It's interesting. I I was a cigarette smoker up until, I mean, serious cigarette smoker. Um, and
Like
fortunately quit that in
Chesterfield?
1986.
Okay.
But I continued to, I was also enjoyed Copenhagen and Skoal. And that was actually harder to quit than, cigarettes. But I did. And that was probably a couple of years later. So I was tobacco free from probably the late 80s until I got remarried in 2010. And my wife, I had been watching, YouTube is a very interesting invention because I stumbled across some cigar reviews and I got interested in. I always enjoyed the aroma, the smell of somebody smoking a cigar. Right, it was always
Yeah.
a
It's
pleasant.
alluring.
It was a pleasant tobacco smell. It wasn't acrid like after you quit smoking cigarettes, you can't stand cigarette smoke. Right, it's terrible.
Yep.
You can smell the chemicals in it that you weren't able to smell when you were smoking them. But there was
Yep.
something about the cigar aroma, and so my wife asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I said, a couple of cigars would be nice, right? So she went down to the local cigar shop and had the fella there put together a sampling of 3 cigars for a new cigar smoker. I
Oh.
remember 2 of them very clearly. One was a CAO Black, the Connecticut, it's a Churchill
Yep.
size, and the other one was a Romeo Juliet 1875, probably a Toro. I can't
Yep.
remember. I want to say that the third one may have been a Rocky Patel, but I'm not sure because Rocky was pretty popular at that time. And Walter, I had to learn how to cut and light off of a YouTube video, right? So I watched,
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
and it was nice that the guy included one of those little cheapo beepo cigar cutters, right, in the sampler pack. So I did my thing, I tried my first 3 and then enjoyed it and didn't know anything about, some of these reviews talk about these tasting notes and whatever. And I'm more in your camp. I either like a cigar or I don't. That's pretty simple, right?
Yep.
But then I went down to the cigar shop, the tobacco shop, and talked to the guy and started sampling different cigars and kind of just testing my palate. And I was fortunate enough that we moved very close to a walking distance, probably a 3-minute walk from a very nice cigar shop that had a private membership cigar lounge in the back, and it was really reasonable, $150 a month. And that was,
You, did you pick the house because of the proximity to the cigar shop?
and I stumbled across it after we moved, right? But
Yeah.
really, the guy that was in there the most, he really helped me develop my palate. Hey, you might want to try this one, you might want to try this. But I had 12 leather club chairs in the lounge, had a liquor bar, bring your own bottle, a full
Yep.
size refrigerator, you put whatever you want in there and just put your name on it. And so that's really where the journey began, probably between 2010 and 2011. And I'll tell you a story about one of the cigars on my list. I have a good story with smoking it with my 2 sons at that particular lounge. So that's how I got into it. My wife actually bought me a sampler pack.
That's a good story. The those little shops, because we're the little town I live in, we used to have a place called the Cigar Box, and
Mm-hmm.
this older gentleman ran it.
Mm-hmm.
And I popped in there before we lived here once, and I just, he had a huge humidor. He was one of those kind of cranky old guys you find in a cigar shop. Um, and he had a VIP section in the back where they had lockers where you could put your
Right.
cigars in there in a bottle. And I remember I went in there and he's like, "What do you normally smoke?" And I'm like, "Well, I've been kind of smoking these Cuban Boulevards."
Wow.
And he's like, why do you bother with those?" And I'm like,
Because they're
"Because
great.
they're freaking good. They taste great." And he's like, if I give you something to try, you sit down and smoke it with me, and if you like it, you buy it. If you don't, you don't buy it. I'm like, all right, fair enough, because I had about a half hour. So he went and grabbed me a Padron
There you
4000,
go.
and he said, "This
What's
cigar
this one?
will lock up with anything like what you're
Yep.
smoking, and he'll lock up with anything that any cigar you're gonna have. It'll be consistent." And he just raved about it, and we lit it up. We sat there and chatted, um, and I got his story about Padrones, and I tell you, if I could only have one cigar, that would be it.
Yep.
It's they never canoe. They're always got a great draw. I mean, they're just a well-made cigar.
Absolutely.
Um, and the families, it's a family-run business. Um, so, and that shop sort of closed down um, after a few years. So that's why I built my
There you
own
go.
cigar room. Um, but those cigar shops, whenever I travel, I was in St. Louis last week. Boom, there's a John's Cigar Shop, right? And you walk in, and then there's 6 guys, right? All a little bit on the senior
Sure.
side, sitting in these ratty old chairs. It's got the old style like cabinet countertop with the cigars inside.
Right.
So he kept his premiums there, and then the humidor was probably 40 feet long, and it was chock full of just about anything you could want. And then in the way back, he had pipe tobacco.
Nice. Yeah.
But it's like you walk into any one of those, any part of the country, and it looks the same, different faces, but everybody, it's like, they walk in like, "What'd you buy?" Right? And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "What'd you buy?" And they're just curious about what it is that because I just needed a cigar to walk around town with, and I
Right.
picked up a Nat Sherman.
Yeah. Good choice.
So, and they all felt compelled to say, "Well, that's a really good cigar." Okay, guys, thanks, appreciate it. Well, I'll see you next time I'm in here. But that just has a cool vibe to it. Those little spots
Right.
are old Americana, I think.
I remember
So,
the fella that Larry was his name. Now that I think about it, Larry, the guy in the cigar shop by the house where we moved, he asked me, "What are you smoking?" And I think at that time it was like I was trying some Gurkha. I named 2 or 3 like Cinco Vega. He goes, "Oh, you're a mail order guy, right?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Well, let me give you a little bit of education." So he's really the guy that opened my palate by having me try. I don't really honestly think I had a Maduro with a Maduro wrapper up until that point, right? Because he explained to me the wrapper, the the binder, the filler. He really explained cigars to me, and that's really where I got most of my education was from Larry in the cigar shop.
yeah, I think we've all run into a Larry. I mean, mine was
Right.
Bob, um, and I learned, like, I'm not a big, like, those. If I get a package of cigars, or somebody gives me cigars, and there's any Ligero
Oh yeah.
or like one of those big heavy ass kicking cigars, I I just put them in the corner of my humidor, and when I see my brother, I just give them to him.
Yeah. Or the
Because
Oscuro, the really heavy leather. That's one of the wrapper features that I don't enjoy. Often. I'm more of a like you. Padron 4000 Natural is for me. It's also the like you and I talked before the desert island cigar, right?
Yeah, yeah. If I could only have the one, I mean, that's because of the consistency to it. But it you know, we both agree that the people that can go and tell you they get the little coffee and the fruit and the leathery kind of like, okay,
Right,
I'm not saying they
right,
can't do it, but for me, it's like I like this cigar, and it's how I look at wine. Um,
exactly.
I either like it or I don't. I can't necessarily tell you exactly why, but if I sit there with somebody who knows what they're doing, like I first guy that taught me about wine was like, I don't like red wine, and he's like, all right, and we go to his cellar and he opens up a bottle of red wine. And I just said, I just told you I don't like red wine. He goes, that's $100 bottle of wine, and you're gonna like it. And he wasn't wrong. I learned to understand it and appreciate it, and I know that it's better with some wines are better with
Sure.
food, and some cigars it just brings on a whole new personality when a good cup of coffee or a Grand Marnier or 30-year-old tawny. Those are those are special. Um,
One thing I
so
think I really observed, preparing for this is how much, for me, it's only been a 12-year journey, but it's amazing to me how much my palate has changed over the years. For example, when I got into Maduros and, Connecticut's were just didn't have the flavor that I was looking for at the time. And now, if you think about it, 12 years later, I like a good Connecticut on a Sunday morning, or it's a nice, easy smoke.
easy way to
Yeah,
start
there's
it
a
in.
couple of different Connecticut's that I really enjoy right now. But when I was heavy into Maduros and I will say for I think most cigar smokers' palates change and adjust over the years. Right? It's just one of those things that we go through. Just same with whiskey, right? It's I remember getting introduced or reintroduced to bourbon. We drank a lot of bourbon in Germany when I was in the army. Right, we had the Class Six store. Go to the Class Six and you're
Hmm.
buying Jim Beam or just a regular whiskey. We didn't really delineate at that time between bourbon or Tennessee with Jack Daniels, whatever. But just like getting educated about bourbon, right? And weeded bourbons and mash bills and all that. But at the end of the day, it's what whiskey do you enjoy? And that again, I think your palate's going to adjust over time.
I think mine is about the mood, right? Like what am I in the
Right,
mood for?
right,
And I know I've got 70, 75 bottles um, at any given time, and it's to me it's like, all right, what I look at it like, what am I
yep,
in the mood for, and what am I smoking? And sometimes if you go for um, a heavy alcohol content, you gotta that can kill a cigar. You gotta step your cigar up to be able to pair those with the heavy alcohol. But I don't know. To me, it's always about what the mood is, what the day is. A Sunday morning, sitting in a hot tub. You know, I don't want
right.
something heavy. It's kind of start the day with a strong cup of coffee and a cigar. So I think we created a list of some of our favorite cigars, and I don't know if they're complete. Um, I know I struggled. So, um, how many did you pull together?
You know, five, five, and it was super difficult. It was one of the hardest tasks that I've been assigned in recent memory. But I just went with five cigars that my I think my rules were it needed to be something currently in my rotation and in my humidor, and a
Hmm.
whiskey that is either on my shelf or I can run down to the liquor store and get one if I want one. Because a lot of things are
Got it.
apportioned now, which is strange to me to have any bourbons that are apportioned, because 10 years ago you could get any bourbon that you wanted, right? So that's what I did.
Yeah,
Five and
they,
five.
so I've got 5 and 5, but I picked cigars. My criteria was a little different, which is fine. Um, in cigars that were memorable
Yeah.
to me, that have a meaning, not just for the cigar, but it was a great cigar, but I had it at, and it brings back a pretty good memory.
That's that's
Um,
excellent.
so why don't you go first? Why don't you go with
Well,
number
one of
five?
just talking about that, one of the cigars on my list has a really sits right in the middle. But I'll start off with a brand that I don't think a lot of people are, at least from my perspective, it's not a very popular cigar, but I love everything in the lineup. It's called Curavari. I think I suggested that you buy a couple of those. I like everything in the
I have a
Buena.
box in my
Oh, what's that?
I have a box in my humidor based on your recommendation.
Well, I like everything in the Buenaventura, which means good luck line. There's probably maybe be 8 or 10 cigars in that line. Um, I'm I have a box of what's called Picador or Picadors. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's a 6 by 52 stick that it's one of those. It's just rock solid in the rotation and pairs with anything. But I personally like that particular Curavari cigar with Buffalo Trace bourbon, because to me Buffalo Trace is a little lighter. It doesn't punch me in the face. Doesn't it's a more of a mellow, a sweeter, vanilla cherry kind
Yeah,
of
it's got
a
a sweeter
simple
finish
bourbon,
to it.
right? Buffalo Trace is a simple,
Yep.
but it's hard for me to find in our area right now. It's very rare to see Buffalo Trace on the shelf. So that's I think for a number five, that's really a solid stick. And price wise, you're in the $5 to $8 range. So it's a really easy everyday smoke.
Nice, nice. So I went with my number 5 was the Boulevard Royal Corona, Cuban cigar. I used to get those. Um, a friend used to get them from Spain. We'd buy a couple of boxes at a clip, um, smoke them sitting on his deck or my deck. We would drink these. He would take strawberries the night before and put this alcohol on soak the strawberries in the
Right.
alcohol, and I've got COVID brain, so I'm drawing a blank on it's Italian after dinner, um, really high alcohol content. Um, Jeez, I just blew out of my brain
Are you
when I
thinking about
started to think about it.
aperitif?
But well, it is an aperitif, but it's an Italian liquor that is just like my wife says it tastes like kerosene.
It's not
Um,
Campari, is it?
no, 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 no. It's
Oh,
really high alcohol. It looks a little bit like moonshine, and it's got a little
okay.
viscousness to it. But he would soak the strawberries in it, so every strawberry that you took a bite out of, you got hammered, right? And then he would pour a sparkling wine on top of
Wow.
these strawberries, and we would just sit there with ice and just drink this concoction that required to call your wife to come pick you up as it was it's a good afternoon, let's put it that way. But we'd smoke those Boulevards, and those were kind of a medium, um, full-bodied medium, right? That in that on that
Right.
right side of that, and just such a pleasant taste, great aroma. And it was one of those things where I was walking.
To get your free copy of Walter Crosby's new book, The 7 Big Mistakes CEOs Make with Their Revenue Forecast, follow the link in the show
remember
notes.
to like, share, and subscribe. Sales and Cigars, produced by thepodcastproshop.com.
And she hadn't been around me smoking a Cuban cigar. So long story long, she said it reminded her of the cigars that her grandfather used to smoke when they went for a walk in Germany as kids. And all it was he was smoking Cuban cigars, and she could tell the difference in the smell, which didn't seem to offend her quite as much as the other cigars. That
you brought up a memory of Germany. My first German girlfriend's father did the same thing with strawberries and rum, and they call it Rumtopf, and it was in a crock like a soup tureen. And talk about putting you on your ass. I was 18 years old. I'd already, become accustomed to German beer. But I'll tell you what, when we lit into that, Walter, I don't remember. Let me put it to you this way. I don't think I could get off the couch, and I don't remember getting off the couch. Because they used a very strong, either Romanian or Hungarian rum spirit with those strawberries. Yeah.
Really? Hungarian rum? Never heard of that.
It was just a very interesting experience. But you brought that memory back after that was in probably 77, I'm guessing. Maybe earlier, 76.
Well, all right, so let me go. I'll do my fourth one, and then we'll come to you.
That sounds good.
The Padron 1964 anniversary is probably. I mean, it's on the list because I smoke one at least once a year. When my grandmother, the year she died, she bought me a couple of those for my birthday, and my birthday is in March. And she passed in July. Her birthday's in December, and she was the matriarch of the family. Like everything revolved around Granny, and so I started a tradition that year where I would go out to the cemetery. It's about an hour drive, and just me and her and 1964 Padron, and I'd smoke it in the and sort of honor her for that those cigars she got me for my birthday. And I've just kind of kept that tradition going. On the way out to the cemetery, there's a cool little cigar shop, so if I don't have one, I stop out there, pick up a couple, and go out and visit Granny, and sort of that's sort of the tradition. So there's a little memory there. So before I forget again, the beverage that I was talking about that we soaked the strawberries in.
Oh, grappa. Sure. Yeah, familiar with it.
It's just I love grappa, but try that sometime on a hot summer day. Soak the grappa in the strawberries. The strawberries will swell, and then you put the strawberries in the bottom of a pitcher, put ice on top of it, and then pour some sparkling wine in there, and get ready for a long afternoon.
That's a great story. You talk about stories on, and it's funny. You've had two top shelf kind of cigars, and it's nice how we balance each other out, because I'm going to be on the bottom shelf kind of stuff, but
we didn't do that on purpose.
It's funny, and this Larry, the same guy at the tobacco shop there, introduced me to a brand called Oliva, which I still feel is a really good value. It's hard to beat.
Yep.
Many of their cigars for the price point and quality. But for me, he introduced me to the Oliva Serie G Maduro, which is still consistently in my rotation. It's kind of like, oh, I don't know what to smoke, right? Nothing particular. I keep Serie G Maduro. I think the shape is called a figurado. It's kind of narrow on both ends.
Yep.
I just enjoy that cigar, and it pairs really well with everything. And for a value, the value on what those cost, and not to plug anybody, but you can buy a box at the Fox Cigar for still under $100, right? Which is crazy. I think that's
Yep.
probably 24 cigars. But I like to pair that with a bourbon. It's probably also bottom middle shelf, called Elijah Craig's Small Batch, right? It's just a higher rye. Yeah, it's
That's
a
a
good
great bourbon.
It's really, really probably pairs well with everything. But I kind of like the higher rye, the little bit of the spiciness of Elijah Craig. But that's Larry, introducing me to that Oliva brand, and I still smoke everything in their lineup. Even from time to time a Connecticut.
Yeah, you don't go wrong. You don't go wrong. They're well made,
Right.
consistent. Um, and to me, that it's one thing that turns me off really fast is a poorly constructed
Absolutely.
cigar. And if I buy a box of cigars and there's like one of them that just doesn't burn properly, like I bought a box of Romeo Julieta
Right.
1875s, and I cannot get a draw out of those. I start off with my Cuban poker, right, the one that does the little
Right.
drilling in, and I cannot get those to
Same
draw,
here.
and I don't even bother them anymore. So, all right, what was your number?
I got another thing about Oliva, not to drag this out, but I had a draw problem with a box, and I'm actually connected on LinkedIn to the CEO of Oliva, and I sent him a message on LinkedIn, and I said, "Hey man, I've been smoking Olivas for a long time. I've got a box of, I think they were Churchill Maduros, Serie G." I said, "I can't get these things to draw. What's going on?" He said, "You take that." He responded right away. He said, "You take that box back to whatever store you bought it." And he said, "I'll have my guy drop off." And it was Fox Cigar, actually. It was Fox Cigar Bar. And I took that, I tried 3 of them and I couldn't get them to draw. And I got another box and they were fine. So, but he was right on time. He probably, certainly within 24 hours responded. So that's another thing about Oliva is I think their customer service has been really good. But my number 3 has a story that near and dear to my heart. Both of my boys went into the Army, and both served in Iraq at the same time. They were both in theater at the same time. And thank God they're both, came back in one piece. Actually, my oldest son, Ruben, served did 3 tours within 5 years. So he was over there 3 deployments in 5 years.
Wow.
But anyway, they were both back home, and Larry again turned me on to the cigar of the year 2012 was My Father Flor de las Antillas, right? Toro size. I think it has a natural wrapper, right? It's just a nice, could be a sun grown, I'm not sure. But I remember smoking those with my boys in that same lounge. At that time, we were drinking a scotch called Abalor, which was a good, was a probably $50-$60 bottle at that time. And we enjoyed those cigars and that scotch. But I still have those I buy the Tubos now. They're probably a 6x50 stick. And I like to drink that with probably one of my favorite, again, lower middle shelf bourbons called Larceny. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yep.
that one, but again, it's another little bit spicy but very interesting bourbon that you could probably smoke with any cigar. But that cigar probably has the most
that has some
sentimental value to me.
No, that's a big. Those are those big moments where you can spend time with with your boys and share a cigar, share stories, right, and just commiserate that bonding. That's part of what's great about cigars is it if it's with your friends or family, but I find myself in places sometimes, and you strike up conversations with people because you have something in common. That's a great
they
story.
both picked up cigar smoking when they were deployed. They had cigars for soldiers or whatever that program is. They just started smoking cigars over in Iraq, and they're both cigar smokers today, but more weekend kind of guys, maybe one or two sticks. Yeah. But I still send it. Matter of fact, I sent them both one of those Helix cigars that you sent me, and they both liked those. So I always send them a couple of cigars every now and then.
I'll have to thank them for their service with a few more cigars. So my number 3 is Romeo and Julieta #1. They another Cuban that comes in a little tube. It was I don't know. It was we bought a buddy and I bought some cigars from a friend of our past, and he had a shit ton of cigars. He had a huge humidor, and his wife just said, "Hey, can you guys come over here and take these cigars, or help me understand what I got to do with them?" So we went over there one day and we just started pulling out the boxes of cigars that still had cellophane on them, and some of these were 10, 20 years old.
Amazing.
So we just said, look, here's what you do. We'll load up the humidor, but this is worth more than what you think it's worth. And she's like, oh, it's worth maybe $400 or $500, right? And I'm like, no, it's worth more like $2,000 or $3,000 worth of cigars here. So you just let them sit here for a little bit. When if you want to sell them, let one of us know, and then we'll come back. We'll clean up the cigars, take them, and pay you. And a week later, she's like, can you come just get them? Because it was just making her nervous. So that was one of the cigars that we got from him. So that was one of the first cigars that Bruce and I smoked out of that batch, and just a little smaller cigar. Great taste, great for a short conversation with somebody, just sitting, having a short cocktail. And we paired it up with some that one we paired up with a 20-year-old tawny port. That was just perfect. Some of that sweetness and this kind of the sweetness from the cigar, it all kind of worked. So excuse me. And my number 2 is a Romeo and Julieta Churchill Cuban, a little bigger cigar in a tube, that is just so much more complex. There's so much more to it than that little #1. Just a great cigar to sit there and really enjoy and spend some time with it, and have have a deep conversation with somebody. It's a lot of fun, and that one I like. I'm not a big Scotch guy.
River water.
but I had there's one that I like is called Aubin, real peaty, and that works really well with the the bigger Romeo and Julieta. So that's my story. So you're on number
that was
two.
easy for me. My number two is really everything in the La Aroma de Cuba line, and especially the Mi Amor selections. I can smoke those every day, and they're always in my rotation. Even the just the regular, it has the little red wrapper on the bottom. I don't think it has a name. It's just their standard. It's probably a 5x52 or 54 stick. Really, really a nice cigar.
Yeah, it's got that
little
ribbon,
red
right?
ribbon on the end.
It's
But the Mi Amor line, it's not that much more expensive, and 6 by probably 52 or 54. It's a pretty hefty cigar. But I like to pair with another one of my favorite bourbons is another mid shelf. It's 1792. I think it's made by Barton, small batch.
Yep.
And the first, it's a good meaty cigar, and that's a really good meaty bourbon. And I think they just go together really well.
It's another great bourbon and another really good cigar. Good choice. What about your number one?
Did you do your number two?
Yeah, the Romeo and Julieta Churchill.
Well, this is a hands down easy choice for me. It's a Padron 4000. I almost wanted to say a Padron 3500 because I smoke more 3000s now than I do 4000s, simply because I
Just
can't
average
get
them
them.
out.
I can't buy them. And thanks to you, for buying that extra box and sending me that extra box of 3000s, which to me is a great cigar. It's for me, I could smoke them every day, but if I had to just smoke one cigar, it'd be a Padron 4000, and I would probably, tough choice here, but for me, Four Roses single barrel bourbon, always with me. It's like if you're gonna have someone that usually it hasn't tried a Four Roses single barrel, for me it's the perfect match for a Padron 4000. But again, you can drink anything with one of those cigars and it'd be good. But
yep,
that's my number one.
Love it. So my number one would be a Hoya de Monterey Churchill, and that's a Cuban cigar. And my first one, we were at a buddy's house. He was having a bunch of guys over for middleweight fight with Mayweather, and so everybody got there early. There's food, cocktails, and I had brought a bottle of Woodford Reserve Double Oak, and it was supposed to be for the host, but we ended up taking it out on the deck, and we opened it up. He got a glass, but we're sitting out on the deck, having a cocktail, and I had brought some cigars, and one of our friends shows up, and he brought a box of cigars, and he's like, he takes it out of the bag. It's in the cellophane. He goes, before he opens it up, he says, I bought these in the Cayman Islands in 1987.
Wow, 87?
Yeah, and they've been sitting in his humidor. Like, how is that possible? How do you have a box of cigars that you haven't opened in your humidor? It just doesn't, I can't comprehend that. You don't just crack it open and try one. So this was a pretty old cigar, and he handed out one to all the guys on the deck, and we lit it up, and one of the best cigars I've ever had in my life. It was perfect. It was aged. I don't know if it was the environment. It was a beautiful evening, quiet with a bunch of buddies. And then that Woodford Double Oak, it was just like this perfect scenario. So we had, I don't know, he gave us each. He was very generous. He gave us each a couple of those, and you know, just a great evening, great cigar. I still got a couple of those I kind of leave for some special occasions to come in the future.
Nice.
I think I'll save those for. But the other thing I was going to add to this was I have, I just like you, one cigar. I could only have one cigar for the rest of my life. It would be a Padron 4000. And I really like pairing that up. It goes with a lot of different things. But my favorite little bourbon is this Willet.
Right.
And this in a Padron, it doesn't get much better than that. Just a smooth, simple, good sipping bourbon and a great cigar. So plus the Davidoff line, there's not much wrong with the Davidoff line.
Yeah, got lucky when one last story, you had a lot of Cubans in your lineup. And I haven't had or have a lot of Cubans, but when I moved to Pittsburgh, I was shopping for another humidor, and I went on Facebook Marketplace, and there was this handmade, I can't remember, I could go look, I can't remember the name of the builder, but I looked it up on the website for the builder, and it was about a $750 box. Way out of my league, but the guy was asking $250, so I called him because it said, comes with a selection of my Cuban cigar collection. And I'm like, for $250 bucks? So I called the guy.
Maybe it was just the bands.
I called the guy, and it was a doctor. He's a surgeon, and had a great conversation with him over the phone. So drove over to his house. It's up on Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, which is kind of Mansion Row, right? And
nice
I pulled up to the house. I'm like, holy moly. And he came out with this good sized box, Walter. I'm not kidding you. It was, it's, I don't know, it's probably 18 inches wide. You know, it was a good sized humidor. And he gave me a young guy too. He said that he's a Cuban cigar collector, but they recently had their first child, and his wife doesn't want him smoking anymore, and the only time he can smoke is on the golf course, you know. And I said, well, I can smoke them every day, so, you know, give me as many as you want. And he gave me, I believe, 35 cigars. A couple of them weren't Cuban, but they were Lost City Opus X. And he said the newest cigar in there was at least 7 years old, right? So, but in that, he gave me two Partagas Lusitanas, which I've never had. I still have one. I smoked one, and I've smoked several of the other ones that he gave me, including a Bolivar. But that Lusitania was probably, so far anyway, the best Cuban cigar that I've ever enjoyed.
Isn't that the cigar that Arnold smokes?
I'm not sure, but I think a lot of people, you know, like Partagas Cuban cigars. But I bought a 5-pack of the Nicaraguan Bolivars. I don't know if you've had that or not, but that's a damn good stick too. I've really enjoyed that. I didn't think I would, but it is very Cuban-esque. Very nice cigar, but it's a Nicaraguan cigar.
That's a great deal you got on a humidor and some cigars, and you got a guy out of trouble.
I told him, you know, I told him, I said, those cigars you gave me are worth a lot more than $250, but I think he said he had 700 Cuban cigars in his collection, so giving me 35 was very generous. One of them was a pack of those small Cohiba. I still have them because I don't really like the real small, almost cigarello kind of looking things.
Yeah, Petit Coronas or
but
something.
there was H. Upman's in there. Romeo Juliet. I mean, he really gave me a great variety for free. Basically, he just gave me the cigars.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice story. So I I think we covered what we
Sure.
wanted to cover. This was a lot of fun. I spent a little bit of time, thinking about how to do this. It could have gone a couple of different ways, and I think the way your criteria, my criteria, right? Because all the cigars you talked about, those are all great cigars, and it really comes down to like whatever it is that you enjoy is what you should smoke. And just because a cigar is expensive doesn't make it a
Right.
great cigar. I've had plenty of overpriced, crappy cigars in my
Yep.
day. I don't mind the $8-9 padrones that always make it work. So, Ross, I really appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll have to help you help you with your finding some more padrones. I got a couple
man.
ideas. So we'll talk after.
Yeah, it
right.
was a pleasure, like always, and always good visit. I'm glad you're feeling better. I was a little worried about just coming off of COVID if you were able to taste anything, but I'm glad to hear you're back in the saddle.
I'm working through
Good
it.
deal.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to
Bye.
you soon.